So, as a little precursor before we get into this, if you didn't listen to episode 4 of this season, 2 weeks ago, you may want to go check that out. This is a natural sequel to that. So, yeah, I guess let's get right into it. Hello, and welcome to Temple of the False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I am Bruce.
I almost forgot to say my name. If you were here 2 weeks ago, you would know what we're doing today. If you were not, well, hey, here we are. We're building a deck in the episode. We're coming up on our 2-year anniversary next week. Very cool. We got this deck. It's super sweet. It's based around Breena, the Demagogue, and we are about halfway through. I mean, we're a little less than halfway through, right? Because we've got about 30 non-land cards in the deck,
right?
And obviously we're going to have 40 lands, but not all those lands are going to be basics, right?
Right.
So, we've got 32 cards, 2 of which are lands so far.
Okay.
So, just about half. I'm going to say this over and over again, just to fill time, I guess. And as a little bit of celebration, I guess, for our 2-year anniversary, my neighbor decided to play some celebratory music. So if you hear that going on, cool.
Thanks,
it's
neighbor.
Intentional, of course. Who knows? Maybe to make this episode sound okay, I'll do the most minimal editing. All right. So to catch you up, any of you out there, and I guess to reiterate what this deck is all about, Breena is a 1/3 for 3 black and white, one black white, 3 mana, bird warlock, flying whenever a player attacks one of your opponents. If that opponent has more life than another of your opponents, that attacking player draws a card, and you put 2+1/+1 counters on a creature you control.
The phrasing of the card is it is just such a pain. I mean,
she's a mouthful for sure.
Right. Simply put, attack an opponent. Don't attack the opponent that has the highest life total. Then you get some kind of benefit.
Don't attack the one with the least life total.
Oh, the least life total. Right.
Yeah.
And so you get some kind of
inverse of death throne. Yeah.
Yeah. So quit picking on the little guy.
Right.
So, but nothing says you have to go after the biggest guy either. So you can swing at anybody else other than the guy with the lowest life total. Done.
So
easy.
We've been putting this deck together. We've got some cards in some counter stuff. We've got cards that like to use counters as resources. We've got some persist, and then we've got cards that just generally want high power and toughness. Cards like Nadir, Paladin of Atonement, Iron Mastiff, that type of thing, where it's like, do thing based on toughness or power or whatever. So that's kind of where we left off. And the idea behind what we wanted to do today was kind of fill in some of the utility, hopefully make it a little bit on theme, and then round off the deck so that we can play it before next season when we talk about it again.
So the other part of Breena is your opponents are drawing extra cards. That's how Breena works. We're trying to get them to stop attacking you, so we're going to point them to other opponents, and we're going to lure them with that. We're going to throw that carrot out there of a card draw. You get to draw a card when you swing at another opponent. Great. Okay, so my thought then became, we should make that a little painful. So I started thinking about something along the lines of, Underworld Dreams. Now, Underworld Dreams is an enchantment. It costs black. And it says, whenever an opponent draws a card, Underworld Dreams deals 1 damage to that player. It's not a huge thing, but it's something. So I started looking at other cards that do something fairly similar to that. and there was Underworld Dreams, Ob Nixilis, The Hate Twisted, and Fate Unraveler. All do that. Also, Price of Knowledge. Players have no maximum hand size. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, Price of Knowledge deals damage to that player equal to the number of cards in that player's hand. And so I started thinking about this, and it's like, do I want to do this? If we're using Breena as the carrot to encourage players to attack elsewhere, is then taking the bonus that they get and punishing them for it really what we want to be doing? So, Andy, I just wanted to throw it out there. You think, is this something that we should be doing? Because my thought...
I think
go ahead.
I think it's tough because, I mean, you draw any of these cards and you're going to want to play them, right? Like, you don't put cards in your deck that you don't want to play. And to an extent, like, say you draw, with over the course of 2 or 3 turns, you draw into all 4 of these, and you play them, then your opponent is going to be like, okay, well, if I draw, a card, it's going to deal 3 damage to me, and then it's going to deal another damage to me on, my upkeep type of thing. So it's definitely a tough line you want to balance where there's like a very specific amount that you'd want on the battlefield, because, I mean, generally you're not going to want all of these,
no,
because then your opponents are not advised to attack elsewhere. They're just going to attack you, period.
Right. Now, I look at a card, like, if you play Underworld Dreams, well, then essentially you're offering them the same card draw that Phyrexian Arena offers to you. And we'll play the Arena. I mean, draw a card, take a point of damage, you still want to draw the card. So my thought was, players are not going to be disincentivized to swing at other people to get to draw a card, even if it's going to cost them a point of damage. But then you start thinking about it a little more and realizing, okay, well, on their draw step, they're taking a point of damage. And then on their attack step, they're taking a point of damage. And if they have any other way to draw a card, and let's be fair, most decks offer some sort of regular card draw beyond just drawing at the start of the turn, they're taking another point of damage. So at some point, they start looking at this, and even just Underworld Dreams out. Forget about getting 2 or 3 of these cards out. You're taking 3 points of damage, or your opponents are taking 2 or 3, well, probably 3 points of damage per turn.
Right. At least.
And right. And then they're looking at this trying to decide, is that really worth it?
Right.
So I'm not sure. I mean, I'll put it out there so the audience knows these cards are out there. You can definitely put them in the deck if you think that if you think your group is going to be okay with that. I look at some of the other cards that we've got listed, and I think I'm not completely sold on these cards being in the deck. I think I might try the deck first without, and then maybe come back to them and say, these are cards that could go in.
Yeah, I'm going to throw them in the maybe board for now, just because, I mean, like, they are helpful in the Nekusar kind of way. It's incremental damage, and once or twice your opponent's not going to think twice about it, and then after a while it's like it's a nice shiny object to draw a card, but at what cost is, toward the late game it's going to be a higher percentage. It's going to be a bigger cost.
Right.
So it's tough to know where to go from this. I mean, the past couple weeks that we've been stewing on the utility of this deck, I've been trying to figure out where I would go with it. And I think I would just continue on the paths that we have been. Like, for instance, I found Cryptic Trilobite, which is an XX creature. It's a 0/0 for XX. It says, Cryptic Trilobite enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. So, for 2 mana, you get a 1/1. 4, you get a 2/2, etc., etc. Remove a +1/+1 counter from Cryptic Trilobite to add 2 colorless mana. Spend this mana only to activate abilities. So I wasn't sure. Oh, and then 1 and tap to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Obviously, with Breena, you're going to just be putting +1 counters on it. Maybe. like if that's where you decide to put them. And I really like the idea of using those as literal mana resources.
Yeah.
And there's no like limit to it. Like a lot of cards of this nature would be like, oh, do it once per turn or whatever. But I think this would be a card that you'd have to go back through your deck to see, how many things you would use this mana.
Right.
Which is the hard part. Because, so far we've got Antler Skulkin, Together Forever, and that's kind of it so far. Like, half of Outlast.
Right.
Maybe Hangerback Walker.
Well, I have another card that would certainly benefit from the Trilobite. Twilight Drover. Twilight Drover it's 2 generic and 1 white for a 1/1 creature, and it says whenever a creature token leaves the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Twilight Drover. Now, we've got a few ways to create token creatures in the deck, but that's not really what we're focused on here. The ability is for 2 and a white. So there you go, the 2 from the Trilobite, plus a white. Remove a +1/+1 counter from the Drover. Then you create 2 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying.
Yeah.
So now you can, when one of those spirit tokens leaves the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on the Drover, and you can remove that counter to create 2 more of them. So you see the loop that the Drover's trying to create. The Trilobite helps pay the cost, and Breena dropping a couple of +1/+1 counters on there certainly keeps things moving along as well. So.
Yeah, and I like with the Twilight Drover, like, the loop does increment, like, a single creature each time. So, like, if you have, like, a sack outlet, so on and so forth. If you have infinite white mana, you'd be gaining 1 creature each time.
Right.
Yeah, that's sweet. And, I mean, like, with that in mind, too, like, we can feel a little bit more comfortable putting in tokens. I don't know if I have any, but...
as far as tokens... Mm-hmm. Another card, and I don't really want to wander too far back into this because I know that we were looking to move past this, but Elenda the Dusk Rose.
Okay.
It's a 1/1 for 2, a white and a black. It has lifelink. Whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Elenda the Dark Rose. When Elenda dies, create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is Elenda's power.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Breena puts 2 +1/+1 counters on Elenda. That's 2 of the 2 lifelinking vampires that are going to be added when Elenda dies. Yeah. So another way to produce more tokens. So.
Yeah, and it's a great card, and it's always hard to deal with, and going toward more like removal, like the things that make your deck protect itself.
Yeah.
I found a few things that I think would work really well in this deck. For one, Pestilence. I think Pestilence is an all-star card in this deck, if only because, like, you're going to want to buff your creatures up a little bit.
Yeah.
So they're going to be a little bit bigger than everybody else's creatures.
Yeah.
And you can really hone in on, you have control over it. And I was going to... It's funny because when I was reading this card, I was like, oh, like, sure, like, maybe you can also use it to kind of direct Breena in certain ways. But then I was like, oh, no, everybody's taking damage at the same rate. So, but, I mean, I think it works really well, as a end of turn type thing.
Right. Along the lines of with Pestilence and the idea of a level of mass removal, I found a card and I thought I was pretty giddy about it. It's called Damning Verdict. For 3, a white and a white. It's a sorcery, and it says, destroy all creatures with no counters on them.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, okay, well, our deck specifically wants to put counters on our creatures. Now, I understand that this isn't really necessarily going to be all that good, because virtually everybody is putting counters on stuff. So there's going to be plenty of times when this is just not going to kill the cards you need dead. So there are limitations here, but I don't think any mass removal hits flavor of what we're trying to do with this deck better than Damning Verdict. What is it? It costs like $3 or somewhere between $2 and $3. It's it's so well suited.
Yeah. A card in removal that I found that kind of, I think probably is part of the cycle of Twilight Drover is Drakestown Forgotten. It's 4 and a black for a zombie, 0/0. Enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of creature cards in all graveyards. 2 and a black, remove a +1/+1 counter from it, and target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. So you're using your +1/+1 counters as like little bullets, I guess. And I think it works real well, especially like, you know, if you've got, say, the Trilobite out to help with the cost, or if you just have a lot of mana. It's not great, but I think it works well in the deck.
Yeah, and I'm a little embarrassed I missed this one. It was one of my preview cards.
Oh my, really?
Yeah, so I'm a little embarrassed I missed it. But yeah, no, I think this is great.
And along even also part of this, I guess, idea cycle area is Custody Soulbinders. Now this isn't removal, but it's great for making chump blockers. It's great for making little things to put more counters on. It's 3 and a white for a 0/0. It enters battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. So the inverse of the Drakestown Forgotten, where it's on the battlefield instead of the graveyard. And then 2 and a white, remove a +1/+1 counter to create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. So it makes spirits instead of zombies. These are not going to be the same. It makes half as many as the Twilight Drover, but you could get a lot of +1/+1 counters off the bat,
right?
Unlike the Twilight Drover. So I mean, I think realistically they are versions of each other,
right?
In this context,
yep.
But I think that they work real well in this deck.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Another one. This is one of the ones that I couldn't believe we missed it last time. Mm-hmm. Mikaeus the Lunarch. Mikaeus the Lunarch is X and white. So it enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters. And you can tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on it. But more importantly, you can tap it, remove a counter, and then you put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control.
It's funny you say that because I literally just scrolled to my next screenshot.
Nice.
And it was Mikaeus. Yeah. No, I also saw this card after we stopped recording a couple weeks ago, and I was like, oh, how do we do that?
Right.
Because, I mean, it's perfect.
I mean, there's the other obvious one, and anybody who listened last week knows that we missed it, and they were likely screaming at us because they couldn't believe how insane we were that we would have missed this. Cathar's Crusade, it's just sort of a given. I'm not going to explain what it does or anything because you all know what it does. Because
yeah, because you've been telling us for 2 weeks that we missed it.
Right. So, and yeah, obviously, those two are cards that I think absolutely must be included in the deck. I mean, they ramp the +1/+1 counters much faster than most other cards do. So even like significantly faster than Breena does. So
yeah. So my next couple cards kind of hinge on this idea that toward like mid to late game, I always find myself having way too much mana that I know what to deal with, especially in black and white. And I never remember to put in like those high costed cards. I always have like such a low curve that I never know what to do when it comes to late game. So my next card is Sun Crusher. It's a 3/3. Huh?
Nice.
For 9 mana.
Oof.
It's a 3/3 for 9. It has Sunburst, which means this comes into play with a +1/+1 counter on it for each color of mana used to pay its cost. So, I mean, realistically, you can get 5 counters on it. if you have treasures, if you have exotic grove, if you've got anything that produces any other color of mana. But more than not, you're going to get 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So a 5/5 for 9. And it says for 4 and tap, remove a +1/+1 counter from Sun Crusher to destroy target creature. Or 2 and remove a +1/+1 counter to return it to its hand, to your hand, which is fine. You know, you can pay 2 to save it if somebody's going to board wipe, to play it back out again, or I don't know. Overall, it's unimpressive, but it can really get you out of those tight holes.
Right.
I didn't know where you landed on this card, because I mean it is a 3/3 for 9. Realistically, it's a 5/5 for 9.
Mm-hmm. I think for the most part, given what the deck does, this is one of those cards that, honestly, I'm going to if it ends up in the graveyard and I can recur it directly onto the battlefield, I'll do that, even without the counter. So then I can avoid paying the 9. I get a creature that doesn't have any counters, but, I mean, that's why Breena is there. So Breena can drop 2 counters on it, and then you can start using the ability on the next turn to try and make your opponents pay. I think that's certainly an option.
Yeah, and
rather
I mean,
than trying to pay 9 over and over. I mean,
at this point, like, we've got a few cards at 6 and a card at 7. It's not like it's not like we're too heavy right now.
Right.
But it's a very slow removal is what it ends up being.
All right. So Andy, stop me if we talked about this card the last time. Because you just talked about a 9 mana card. I want to talk about a 1 mana card. It's 1 white, the Hopeful Initiate.
No.
Hopeful Initiate. It's a 1/2 creature with training. And it says whenever this creature attacks with another creature with greater power, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. We don't care about that. We're not really swinging with this thing. We're just getting Breena or somebody to put counters on it. Because the ability is 2 and a white, remove 2 +1/+1 counters from among creatures you control. So it doesn't even have to remove its own creatures. It can be any creature that has a counter on it. It can just remove that. But you remove 2 counters, destroy target artifact or enchantment. Now, there's no tap in this. So if you have 6 mana, you can remove 4 counters and destroy 2 artifact or, 2,
right.
You know what I mean. So
given the price and doing enough, yeah.
Exactly.
Like, you can do this as many times as you need to.
Right. So the Trilobite, you can take off 2 counters, you get 4 mana, and all you need is 2 white mana and 2 more counters to take off, and you're destroying 2 artifacts or 2 artifacts or enchantments or combination.
Or some combination of the
Yes. So I just thought this was something I was curious with, and honestly that the Trilobite's looking better and better with every card I suggest. So
yeah, honestly, when I said it, I was like, oh, this doesn't look great in this deck. But then, just unintentionally, it's kind of come out pretty well. It's funny, though, because the next card that I had was kind of in the similar line of the Trilobite, which is Workhorse, which the art on this card looks like an uncard.
Right.
Just a goofy wizard guard type dude. Yeah. He looks like the old guard. And then like a horse-headed soldier with a... I don't know, it's weird. But it's a 0/0 for 6. And it comes into play with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. So it's a 4/4 for 6 at the base. Remove a +1/+1 counter from Workhorse to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. Play this as mana source. So this is, it's half as good as the Trilobite, but it's better because you can do it to play spells, pay for literally anything rather than have the restriction of doing just abilities. And it's. I feel like this is one of those cards that people would be like, "Wait, what is that?" You know, it's great.
Going down the removal list, Retribution of the Ancients. It's 1 black mana for this enchantment, and it reads: spend a black, remove X+1/+1 counters from among creatures you control. Target creature gets -X until the end of the turn. So
I really like the flexibility of being able to take it off of as many creatures as you want.
Right. So if you've got 3 creatures that each have 2 +1/+1 counters, you can just remove 1 from each of them, so they all still have a counter. And you can now give something -3/-3 until the end of the turn. And of course, it doesn't say you have to do it at sorcery speed. It doesn't say anything. So for the most part, you can let it sit on your board, nice and prominent, and then start swinging. And your opponents are always going to wonder, okay, I can block his 2/2 with my 4/4, but if he takes off counters, then I'm losing my 4/4 to his 2/2 creature, and to the tune where I may not even be able to kill his 2/2 creature. So So a lot of times, I don't even think you're going to have to pay the 1 black or remove the counters. I think the threat of it happening makes blocking so difficult that I think a lot of times you're going to get free passes. You know, and that certainly helps along, considering, you know, if you want to get the benefits from Breena, you have to attack. So you don't necessarily, you know, a lot of times you're looking at some of your smaller creatures as being the only ones on the battlefield. So you have to swing if you want the benefit, but you don't necessarily want your dudes dying willy-nilly, like super fast. So I think Retribution of the Ancients is a great card, and certainly something to think about for the deck.
For sure. I'm quickly running out of cards, but one of the cards that came in the pre-con that I can't get enough of, and I think it was one of my favorite legendary creatures of the year last year, was Fane the Broker.
Right.
And I feel like this card does what you want it to do in this deck. Like, it does the manipulation of the counters, and it makes tokens, and it makes treasures, and it really makes it so that you can, generally, with a little bit of manipulation and planning, end up doing the things you want to do. If you're like behind or if you're ahead, you can, you know, it lets you be able to at least get a little bit of value right before a board wipe, or you know, as it becomes your turn. It really, it's hard to not put it in this deck.
Yeah,
even though it was in the pre-con.
Right. I know we're getting close to the break, so I'm going to throw in one last one under the removal stack of cards. Vishkal, Blood Arbiter. It's for those who don't know, because Vishkal's been around a little while now. It's 4, 1 white, and black. It's a flying lifelink vampire. It's a 5/5. It reads: sack a creature, put X +1/+1 counters on Vishkal, Blood Arbiter, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. So for the most part, if your creature is on combat and it's going to die anyway, you can sack it and make Vishkal bigger. More importantly, though, is the second ability is remove all +1/+1 counters from Vishkal. Target creature gets -1/-1 until the end of the turn for each +1/+1 counter removed this way. So it's just a quick way to pile on, you know, to really hammer an opponent's creature, or you know, if you want a massive flying lifelink creature, Vishkal is your guy.
In the very worst, he's a giant flying lifelinker, and it's really nice because even after you're like, a lot of these creatures that is like, oh, remove blah 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 to do blah blah blah.
Yeah.
A lot of the times, make your creature end up being a 0/0 and then it dies.
Right.
This, it's still going to be a 5/5.
Right.
And on top of it, it gets around things like indestructible. So
right.
You don't need to sacrifice much to it to get, you know, 5 or 6 counters on it to, you know, fly in, gain 11 life, take the 6 counters off, put on, or put the -1/-1 on, a 6/6 that's hard to get around.
Right, and when Vishkal attacks, if he attacks, let's say, assume that he's attacking all by himself. He's a 5/5. If he's attacking the right opponent, Breena kicks in, adds 2 counters to Vishkal immediately, and you draw
for
a card.
free.
So suddenly your 5/5 Vishkal is now a 7/7. You can do the 7 points of damage, and then remove the counters to give another creature minus whatever. So, you know what? I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity and just get rid of your creature anyway. And you still gain the 7 life because you didn't remove the counters until after combat. But, and if you're swinging with multiple creatures, well, if your creature dies, if another creature dies, then fine. Maybe it's done enough damage so that Vishkal can remove those counters they just picked up to finish off the creature. So, Vishkal's very flexible. I mean, the downside is 7 mana, so, take it for what it's worth. If your meta doesn't, isn't going to allow you to cast a 7 mana creature that doesn't have haste, then like I said, you take it for what it's worth. But I think it's I think it's a great card.
It's funny because it's definitely the type of creature that I would forget had taken 5 damage, and then I removed the the 2 counters off of it to -1/-1 something, right, and realized, crap, now he's dead.
Right.
He's a great dude.
Right, and the one piece that's not flexible, it's remove all the counters. You don't get to remove just enough to take out some creature or just enough to do something. It's all of them. So if you're thinking, ooh, this goes so great with the Ozolith, it really doesn't, because it's going to burn all those +1/+1 counters to do the damage. So it's
the great thing with the Ozolith is that it keeps the counters in the system, but if you remove them, then that's
right.
not good.
Yeah, I mean, if Vishkal dies with the counters, then they go back onto the Ozolith. But Vishkal's rarely dying with the counters on. You've taken the counters off to do something. So, but you don't get to choose some.
As you alluded to, we got to take a break. We're gonna throw it over to our sponsors, and when we get back, we've got how many cards left? 13 before we get to our lands, and that'll be fun. And obviously, if we go over, we can cut some out, and that's part of the deck building process as well. So I'll be right back.
All right.
This episode of Temple of Hellspot is brought to you by Pestilence, because I'm still recovering from... Now back to you. We're back, trying to finish up this deck within time, and I think we can do it. I mean, I think we've got 50 or 49 cards right now, non-lands. So we've got 10-ish left to make, and really all we have to do is put in some removal, some card draw. And I mean, sure, we have some removal already, but there are some generic things that we just kind of need to throw in. Card draw, lands, obviously. And I mean, ramp, if white were to have some. I had thought about putting in, bringing up some sort of, graveyard recursive theme going on, but I mean, I don't know. It's just it really, I don't know what would have fit. I mean, I think
the difficulty,
Luminous Broodmoth,
right? And I think a lot of the cards that we've included are cards that sort of keep everything from going to the graveyard,
right?
Or just immediately loop things back into play. And along that line, Twilight Shepherd for 3 white. So it's not cheap, but Twilight Shepherd. It's a 5/5 with flying and vigilance, and when Twilight Shepherd enters the battlefield, return to your hand all cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So when you read that far, you say to yourself, okay, so I'm supposed to hold this 6 mana creature and then play it when all my creatures die. But it doesn't have flash, so I can't do it on an opponent's turn. How is this going to work? Well, it works because Twilight Shepherd has persist.
It also works because it convinces you, or it incentivizes you to just attack out.
Right, so if you lose your creatures, it's not a big deal. You can lose your creatures
Right.
in combat and then play Twilight Shepherd following up. All your creatures are back. The nice part is that once the Shepherd's out, it really discourages your opponents from using mass removal, because all of your stuff is going to the graveyard, including the Shepherd, but the Shepherd has persist. So then it comes back out, because it certainly doesn't have a -1/-1 counter on it when it died. So it comes back out, and it gets a -1/-1 counter. But it brings all of their buddies with it. Great.
Back to your hand, though.
Well, fine. But you're getting them all back out of the graveyard.
Right. You're keeping that value somewhat intact.
Right. So then the next time Breena comes out, you give the Twilight Shepherd 2 +1/+1 counters. One of them nullifies the -1, so the Twilight Shepherd ends up being a 6/6 with a single +1/+1 counter on it. And it's there to protect all of your creatures as you play them back out onto the battlefield. So I think it certainly, like I said, it discourages your opponents from doing the mass removal, because essentially they're going to get rid of your creatures for a turn. So and if your creatures are playing a lot of enter the battlefield, have a lot of enter the battlefield triggers, your opponents know that you're going to get those triggers again. So they may want to think twice about giving you the opportunity to play another, or to get another chance at an enter the battlefield trigger for whichever creature is you're going to play next.
Yeah. For me, this deck ends up almost lacking in this basic categories, like card draw, ramping. And I think one of the best cards that we've seen in the past couple of years is in white with Master of Ceremonies. And I think like this card is like, it's overlooked. I haven't heard enough about it. But from those who have heard about it, like it does the thing. Like it's such a good commander card because it plays with the table. It gets everybody in on the fun, and it does the group hug thing, but very transparently. For those who don't know, it's a 3 and a white for a 3/4 Rhino Druid. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent chooses money, friends, or secrets. For each player who chooses money, you and that player each create a treasure. For each player who chooses friends, create a 1/1 green and white citizen. For each player who chooses secrets, you and that player each draw a card. So you're going to get 3 cards, 3 citizens, or 3 treasures, or some combination of the 3. If you have 3 opponents still. And I think that this deck does the politics so wonderfully, but it also backs it up with these hard hitters where these aren't May abilities. Like, it's not like they can all just opt out like with Tempting Contract.
Right.
Like,
your opponent has to pick whichever one either they want the most or they think you want the least.
Right.
Because you're getting...
So in the very worst, you're going to get a 1/1 citizen.
In this deck, that would be the worst one. But, I mean, how many times does your opponent want the 1/1 citizen, though? From my experience, your opponents are greedy. And invariably, somebody is going to agree to secrets, and you're both going to draw a card. And everybody else at the table is going to be like, if I don't pick secrets, I'm just getting behind on the number of cards. Or if I don't pick treasure, or money, then I'm going to be behind on mana. So people will pick, generally speaking, they pick whatever they need the most. And if it benefits you, well, then they just have to live with that.
Yeah.
So,
because I mean, it's tough because they're gonna want to sit there and think about it for a bit, but you really got to keep the game going, and putting any pressure on them to make a choice. They're going to end up choosing the draw. So, I mean, you and I have talked about this before, probably off the podcast, but with this card, it's so easy to just slip into that like auctioneer kind of like, hey, like, let's make a deal type, almost game show-esque.
The first time I saw this card played, it was Kathleen on Loading Ready Run playing the card, and that's exactly what she ended up doing. I have presents for everyone. What present would you like? And she was just happy to take whatever. Of course you were, because you're getting all. And that's really the way you want to play it. Make it happy, make it exciting. Don't give them time to be thinking, "Oh my gosh, Bruce is getting all of the things." Don't be worried about that part. Focus on the fact that I am providing gifts. I am giving you a gift. What gift would you like? I'm even going to let you choose. It's just that's so sweet.
If you can get your opponent to not pay attention to the fact that you are also benefiting from each choice, then it's going to be a great time. I mean, otherwise they get rid of a 3/4,
right?
And they're the ire of the table because they got rid of all the fun.
Right. Now they
canceled the party.
Exactly. Now you were also talking about card draw and ramp, and how the deck's a little bit lacking. So I'm going to suggest Smuggler's Share. It's an enchantment. It costs 2 and a white. It's fairly recent. And I say that because it's happened in the last, say, 2 years. At the beginning,
I think it's from the same set as Master Ceremonies.
I believe so. So at the beginning of each end step, draw a card for each opponent who drew 2 or more cards this turn. Then create a treasure token for each opponent who had 2 or more lands enter the battlefield under their control this turn. Obviously, this is a card you really want to play early. If you're hoping to get any extra lands onto the battlefield, you really want to play it early because the longer you wait, the more likely it is they're never going to give you that they're never going to give you that opportunity. Even if they have a way to ramp their land, to play out another land, they're going to wait until it's a turn when they don't have one. So then they'll just do that and only play one, and you won't get the benefit. But as far as the draw a card part, Breena is giving them that extra card draw. So... and it's got to be on their turn because it's when they're attacking. So they'll have made their draw at the start of the turn, and then Breena gives them their second card. And as soon as that happens, you get to draw a card on their end step. So it's I love this card. As far as I can see, the only real downside is, once again, your opponents start to look at this and say, I get to draw a card, that's good, but now Bruce gets to draw a card as well, on top of these +1/+1 counters that he already got. At what point does this stop being a good deal and start being that Smuggler's Share has to go, or Bruce has to go? Because you certainly don't want to get to the point where player removal is the best option.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough line to balance because, I mean, I think that, that's kind of where this precon lost some points, was like because it ends up trying to get the value out of your opponents getting value,
right?
And they see right through that,
Yeah.
And if they don't see right through it, they're going to be a little bit cautious about taking any offers or any help. But I mean, that's the nature of this type of deck.
Right. This deck requires the song and dance. You are constantly on the chatter in this game. You want to make sure that your opponents they're not focusing on the +1s that you're getting, they're focusing on the card they're getting. Because if that's the trade-off, a card for a couple +1/+1 counters, the card wins every time. They'll always take the card. It's when you start cutting into that trade, and how far can you cut in? When your Underworld Dreams is sitting out there, is that enough for some opponents to think that it's a bad trade or not? If Smuggler's Share is out there, when they draw their second card, I get to draw a card. Well, wait, hang on. So you're saying you're going to give me a card, but you're going to get a card and a +1/+1 and 2 +1/+1 counters? Maybe that's over the top for them. it's going to depend on your opponent and depend on how much you can convince them to go that route. I mean, this is one of those decks where I think you kind of want to be everybody's buddy.
Oh, for sure.
You know, dude, I'm helping you out. We got to take this guy down, and I'm giving you cards to make this happen. So let's go. Let's do it. Let's take the other guy down.
And it's interesting too, because like it then will lead to, like, if you don't play it right, people will end up trying to constantly remove pieces of your board, if not the whole board at once.
Right.
And the thing you have to kind of keep in your back pocket is some sort of protection.
So Andy, you want to talk about the lands a little bit?
Sure. So far we've got Demagogue and Temple of the False God. We talked about those last time.
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward. I mean, at this point, I would probably just add in 19 and 19 as a base, just to see how it fills out. But at this point, we definitely have more white than black, probably by like 60-40% black and white. And the deck's not finished. We've got 11 more slots for cards. So it's tough to balance out the basics as of now. But I mean, what do we? Are there any non-basics?
The ones that I'm thinking of off the top of my head, Rogue's Passage and Reliquary Tower. We want to swing so that Breena's ability can work for us, so that we can also draw cards. I think a Rogue's Passage is a nice addition. Yeah, I know it doesn't really come into play until much later because you have to tap 4 and the passage, but it's there. I mean, we are running a 2-color deck, so we can afford to have a few of those in there. And Reliquary Tower, if we're actually drawing as many cards as I'm hoping, then being able to hold more than 7 in your hand is probably a good idea.
For utility, I think too, Bonder's Enclave could work. It taps for colorless, or for 3 and tap, you can draw a card, but you can only activate this ability if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. The idea is there. Like, generally, you're going to have that. I mean, even if Breena is the only creature on the board on your side, realistically, you can get at least 3+1s on it in one round. So it shouldn't be too hard to get Bonder's Enclave to work.
Right. Another one I always like to put in is the Temple for the whatever color pair you're running. So in this case, Temple of Silence comes into play tapped and it lets you scry 1. It's not super amazing or anything. It doesn't particularly fit theme, but any opportunity I have to add a scry 1 and the full cost of this is this card comes into play tapped, I will take that. And I'd also encourage you to run Vault of Champions. That's
yes.
It enters the battlefield tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents. So this is a land that taps for either, and it doesn't come into play tapped, and that's just amazing. Not to be underestimated. So, and
along the same lines, I think I would put in Exotic Orchard. There might be times you want to make mana that isn't black or white. With things like the Sun Crusher.
Yeah.
Let's see, what else we got for lands? Godless Shrine, of course. If we're gonna do any halfway decent.
And then you can start. As far as that, you can choose your mana base based on how much money you're willing to spend and what cards you have. So if you've got cards that allow you to sack to search for a plains or a swamp, then you really want to load up with Godless Shrine and some of the other duels that have the basic land types on them. So just something to keep in mind. I know that for me, when I go through, I quite often just roll through the cards that or the lands that I have and just include one of each of those just to sort of fill it out. As long as I'm not loading it up with too many come into play tap lands. Yeah.
A card that I think sometimes gets overlooked because people want to play many colors is War Room. I think 2 color commanders is probably the maximum you want to play with this card. For 3 and tap, pay life equal to the number of colors in the commander's color identity, which is 2. So 3 tap, pay 2 life, draw a card. Similar to Bonder's Enclave, but less restrictive. And you get a card of it. It's great.
Yeah.
I'd love to recommend the castles, Castle Ardenvale and Castle Lochthwain. Castle Ardenvale for 4 and tap, you can create a 1/1 soldier, but for 5 mana, you better be having better things to do with your mana. And then Castle Lochthwain, I think it's black 1 and tap, draw a card, and then lose life equal to the number of cards in your hand. So if you're drawing a lot of cards, this is not cutting it for you. You do not want this, even if you are kind of stuck in a stall.
Right.
Card that I found that people generally like, at least in our meta, is Gaia Reach Sanitarium, because it starts to really make people think about their cards.
Yeah.
And I think it does so well in terms of both being political, so that, like, you know, if somebody doesn't want to discard a card, or you know, somebody doesn't want to draw a card, then you know, it does that. But I think what's great too is that we've got a few cards in here that do, like whenever opponent draws a second card for their turn, you do X, right? And obviously, if they see this effect on the table, they might be disincentivized to non-attack and trigger Breena. But with the Gaia Reach Sanitarium, you can just force them to draw that second card anyway.
Right.
Which I dig.
Yeah. And I mean, as long as you're even looking down that line, then you can start looking at all of the cards that, you know, where everybody draws a card. You know, your Temple Bell, your Howling Mine. Temple Bell is probably better because you can activate it on any person's turn. So you can activate it on the last opponent's turn to draw the card before the start of your turn, or if you need someone to be drawing their second card and they're refusing to, you know, use Breena's gifts, then, you know, you can just force feed that gift right down their throat.
What I like is this, like, very, very infrequently do I find a deck that Karn's Bastion definitely needs to be in. But this is definitely one of those decks.
Oh, yes.
For 4 and tap, you get to proliferate, which is excellent if you've got, you know...
Yeah.
It also incentivizes you as the Breena player to put +1s on other creatures.
Yeah, spread
not
the
just
wealth.
like load them up all on one, you know?
Yeah.
So I think there are so many different ways you can go. I mean, there are like so many lands that you could...
yeah, an Opal Palace is another one.
But I think that you also want to leave room, and I always try to back off putting too many.
Yeah. I always go down that route. I always end up putting too many in and then realizing I have to pull back.
And I think where we are now, we have got 19 non-land or non-basics. I think it would be pretty easy to just put in 21 basics pretty well. Probably leaning on white. I'd say probably like 12-9 if we were to do it right now. I mean, like, I'm just going to put it in now, and if we find any other land along this way, we can add it. And I think that, you know, there's a few... We've got enough space to put 11 more cards in, and I think that we're running up on time, but I think that, like, you know, your basic removal, your basic kind of ramp things,
right,
that may not fit thematically, but you know, if you've got cards lying around that you want to use in a deck, you can always do that. I mean,
right. I mean, we are talking about Orzhov here, so you've got, you know, Utter End, Unmake, Rite of Oblivion, Profane Procession, D-Spark, Anguished Unmaking. These are all, you know, Orzhov colored cards that, and generally, if it's Orzhov colored, it's you're targeting permanents. It's not just creatures or just artifacts. It says permanent, and a lot of times it's exiling. So you're getting around a lot of ways for people to return those cards back to the battlefield by not sending them to the graveyards. So take your pick, go with what you've got, and
yeah. So we'll have a list up in the show notes for those who want to check this out. If you want to build it, if you want to, toy with it and change things up, feel free to send us a list. We'd love to know your adventures with this deck. If you've ever built Breena before, let us know what you think about this dandy card.
And do remember, we were trying not to use a lot of the cards that came in the pre-constructed deck. That was kind of the point. We talked about Fane the Broker, and we talked about a couple, I think there were a couple others as well, but the goal was to not rebuild the pre-con, was to come up with, something a little different that wasn't, too outrageous as far as cost. So, I think we've done that rather successfully here.
For sure. Ever since this deck was previewed, I have been excited about this card, and I played it in the pre-con, and it was fine. I feel like there were a few too many times that I didn't end up doing anything, but I feel like building around this card with your own collection might be, honestly, a better idea. So I'm excited to see what we get out of the next couple games with this deck. So.
Well, the fact that we went 2 episodes and we could have gone a full 2 episodes just talking about cards that do stuff with +1/+1 counters.
Yeah.
The 90 or the 100 cards that we've got listed here, this is not the be-all end-all deck. Obviously, we haven't tested any of it, but there are plenty of other options. And if you have something sitting in your collection that uses a +1/+1 counter that we haven't mentioned here, it's not like we're saying no, you shouldn't use that. It just, this is what came up. I don't know about Andy, but a lot of these cards are cards that I just happen to see in my own collection. So I didn't come up with Retribution of the Ancients just off the top of my head. It was a card that was actually just sitting there in my collection, and that I noticed it there. So, so feel free to do the same with yours. I think Breena offers a lot of options.
For sure. And I think that's going to do it for us this week.
Yep.
Next week, we'll be back with a super cool episode, as always, because that's what we do. We're Temple of False Pod. We're decks are not optimized, clearly. But our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
Thank you so much for listening. Have a great night, and may your 5th land be the Temple.
Bye!
Wait, before you go, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. You can reach out to us via email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com or on Twitter @falsepodmtg. Bruce is @manaburned, and I'm @AndyWeekend, though you'll definitely notice I use the podcast Twitter far more often. Now that we've got you here, make sure you subscribe, rate us on whatever podcast platform you use. It helps us out. It gets us more reach. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Like a video there. Leave some comments for more casual enjoyment. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with some more timeless discussions about all things casual. So come hang out, and may your 5th land be the Temple. Bye-bye. Should I do my best, Bruce? Bye!